Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening. It's a great privilege to have Professor David Sainz with us and taking up his time. I know it's been a very busy week for David. And please allow me to just explain a little bit about how this evening will work. I think, of course, the focus of tonight is about the new licensing scheme, which was announced over last weekend. And I'm going to be speaking with David about his view on what this means for the sector, and potentially also steer towards some of his predictions for how things may unfold. I'd really like to kick off by asking David to introduce himself to everyone, and then I'll start with the first few questions, if that's all right, David.
Of course, and very good of you to invite me, Tristan, and colleagues at Harley Academy. A great pleasure to be with you all this evening. Yeah, David Sainz. I'm the chair of the Joint Council for Cosmetic Practitioners, but I also chaired the original Department of Health review into education and training standards for health education in England. And I think we'll probably come back to that conversation a bit later during the webinar. But my experience and engagement has been in governance, educational governance, and overall quality and standard control within the sector, as opposed to a practitioner. I am a registered and regulated healthcare practitioner, which I think is helpful, but much more importantly in this context, it's objectivity for governance and supporting the implementation of a new licensing scheme.
Thanks so much, David. Now, I've obviously known you for probably 6 or 7 years since we were really involved together in the Health Education England discussions. So this evening, we'll spend half an hour, and I'd really appreciate you, David, talking us through the journey that's got to where we are. And then I think in particular, there's definitely going to be some questions around the education standards as well. And then I think what we'll do in the final 15 minutes is take some questions from the audience, and then we'll take them one by one as we get to 7:30, and we should finish by 7:45. So, David, I think assuming there's a lot of confusion out there, it would be great for you to kind of take us on the journey of how we've got to this point of licensing, the journey that you've experienced yourself, and how real this is, I suppose.
Yeah, well, first of all, we should all be fitting in, and I think that's a very useful starting point. This is a collective journey of shared experience. It's also a collective journey to celebrate excellence in the aesthetics industry, where we're all aspiring for high standards. Well, very simple words, easy things to say, but you know, when the journey started in April 2014, Tristan and colleagues, it was a very different place. I found when I entered the sector as an observer, effectively at that time, I discovered a very unregulated, discoordinated, fragmented, and very conflicted sector. And I have to say, I took a deep breath and thought, wow, how do I navigate this space? But I did so by great support from so many colleagues that we were able to start to build from very early first steps a commitment to designing something that would not in any way destabilize the commercial importance of the businesses that really are so important to you all. And I respect that completely. But I think our adage has always been excellence in standard setting and in commitment to high quality public safety and protection should be the mantra to attract more customers into the actual sector itself. So what we did was to make a decision very early on, and that was we should start to develop education and training standards that would do a number of things. One, define what we mean by good practice in terms of competencies. Anyone can aspire and state they are good practitioners, but remember, the world we are currently working in permits any person to step from the high street to a different section of the high street to actually perform invasive cosmetic treatments without regulation or without adherence to what has to date been a non-legally enforceable standard of practice. In other words, We have standards, and we'll come on to those in a second, but they're not enforceable. So why would any practitioner necessarily regard themselves as being accountable? So we made a clear decision. We, who's the we? Health Education England was, until April this year, the education and training and governance arm of the National Health Service. We, with the General Medical Council, the Nursing Midwifery Council, GDC, General Pharmaceutical Council, Healthcare Professions Council, CQC, MHR, I think you're getting the picture. There was a body of corporate interest, along with Ofqual, university providers, aspiring education providers. And Tristan, you were one of those at that time, to be quite fair. But you came along with a vision and a collective voice that said, let's start to set standards. So we did. We set standards collectively.
Can I just interject there? So, and this is well, the question is, where did you come from, and what was your involvement in Health Education England, and why is it that you have had a position of authority in this process? I think that's worth answering.
Well, thank you, Kristen. I'll be quick, of course, on that. Long career, National Health Service through and through. So I'm a healthcare regulator in many ways. I used to chair the Standards Committee of the Nursing Council, being government appointment in a number of bodies, both in Wales and in Northern Ireland and in England, on a range of organisations. The day job was, in fact, in my latter years, about the last 15 years, have been a Pro-Vice-Chancellor in universities. So I had responsibility for educational governance, but that led me into a number of commissions with the Department of Health, as it then was, to lead a number of workforce reviews across the country, Tristan. So the standards, the emergence of professions was always part of my mantra and interest.
Okay, so that makes sense. Now, if I just pick out the major milestones from the Keogh reports, 2012, through to then there was the Health Education England guidelines, 2014, 15, 16. And then,
Correct.
And so then I think what's worth understanding for the audience this evening is what happened from those original recommendations, and how did that end up becoming part of your purview with the JCCP? And how is that all tied together into what's happening now?
Sure. So again, got to quickly produce a very simple biopic view on this very quickly. So I delivered the HE standards to the government at the end of 2015, and they were all accepted. That's important. They're accepted by our regulators and by the government and by many components of the sector. Some reticently, but many saw the importance of them. Not my standards, these were collective standards. The issue was, Tristan, at that time, the government did not feel ready to implement those standards or to enforce them as part of a regulatory scheme. That's a critical point. So the outcome was to create the Joint Council for Cosmetic Practitioners as a voluntary regulator in its own right. Now, regulator is a strange word, isn't it? Of course, we're not regulators, but we were there to be guardians of the standards that have been produced by Health Education England. And we still own those standards. So what we did very quickly was to take those standards, to work with industry, the Royal Colleges, and to revise those standards into a very pragmatic framework, which is called the JCCP Competency Framework, published in 2018, which brings together the views and standards of BARPS, BAPRAS, British Association of Dermatologists, BCAM, and others, and of course, all of the HEE standards. We then campaigned rigorously to get licensing, and then we were able to find a way of doing it. So in 2021, having published our 10-point plan for regulation, we plugged it in to the debates in the House of Commons and the House of Lords in the autumn of 2021 and January 2022, and we successfully, along with other colleagues, produced a licensing clause, which is now embedded as Section 180 of the Health and Care Act 2022, which says the Secretary of State will implement a new licensing scheme for England for non-surgical cosmetic procedures, but he would need to consult on the procedures and the scheme of regulation before it was enacted.
So am I right? I don't know the answer to this question. So I remember you having a memorandum of understanding with the various professional statutory regulators that represent doctors, nurses, dentists, pharmacists. And so my understanding is you pulled together the opinion and the input of various professional groups, and then this was what was part of your submission to government to then bring forward this act.
Correct. And it was a multiple stakeholder engagement. The JCCP is a charity, not a commercial business. We exist to bring opinion together in the public interest. So I built on the model we were successfully able to transact with HEE, Health Education England, which to bring all of those regulators and stakeholders together to get consensus on common view. So you're right, we do have memorandum of understanding. They're very current with all of those regulators and with the MHRA, the Chartered Institute of Environmental Health, which will be responsible going forward as well, in terms of enacting this whole registration process, or licensing process, I should say.
And for the purposes of full transparency, there were of course other parties that were contributing their view and voices alongside the JCCP to ultimately achieve this legislative act.
Of course,
yes.
Of course. So we mustn't ignore the real expertise of the education sector itself, Tristan. You were part of that. There were other, of course, approved providers and others helping us, assisting us, challenging us, helping us to refine our views. But also the British Beauty Council have been superb in their support and alignment. And I think there's a misperception here. There are very strong supportive views from some of the larger beauty organisations that support the licence in its current proposed form. I think that's important. Unifying opinion is critical.
Agreed. So now we're at a stage where this act has some form of manifestation, because we have what's been announced is the government's plan to enact licensing. So in your summary, what would you describe that? What does that look like?
Well, okay, we've got to be very brief, but on Saturday, the government published its first consultation paper. There will be others, colleagues, to follow. I'll mention them briefly in a moment. So this first one was a result of significant engagement led by the Permanent Secretary, Parliamentary Secretary of State, Under Secretary of State, Maria Caulfield, who we've engaged with throughout this journey. Very committed government, I must say that. Cross-party, and that's again crucial. Conservative, of course, and our Labour colleagues, really vital, supporting this. So we knew we were moving forward, significant support. So what does it do? But having consulted with many people, the JCCP produced 3 papers in March this year with the intention of informing the regulatory team at the DHSC of the types of procedures that we believe should be regulated as part of the licence. We knew that would be the first consultation. So what you will find, what you'll see now, it's there. We can be public about this. On the 2nd of September, on Saturday, the government published its consultation paper. And what it said was this: we are minded to introduce a proportionately assessed risk focus on the procedures, a stratified system of risk for the procedures that we have so far been advised should be in the scope of this new practitioner licence. Remember, there will be 2 licenses, one from the premises for which you work, i.e. a premises licence, and one for the practitioner, and that licence will require a practitioner that provides procedures that will be in the scope of the licence to hold a practitioner licence that will have to be evidenced by achievement and alignment to competencies and standards yet to be defined. Consultation 2, I guess, next year. So back to this one. When you look at the document, it's an easy read, actually. Read it, it's not off-putting. It reminds you of the role of the CQC, really important, and I have regular conversations with them. And what it says is that we have agreed as a government at the moment to propose 3 stratified sections to our consultation. We're calling them green, amber, and red. So the procedures that we perceive at this stage to provide or present minimal risk or minor risk to members of the public are green. Those procedures which are listed should be provided by a person who holds a license, but they will not be required to have any form of supervision for the green procedures. Then we move to the more perhaps exciting part and the more challenging part. There's a long list of amber procedures where there is perceived and indeed evidence-based moderate harm if performed in a non-proficient manner. So the recommendation is that those procedures, which includes things like botulinum toxin injections, things such as weight loss injections, are also things such, of course, as dermal fillers, certain and non-ablative lasers. I could go on. I'm not taking up your time. Read it. It's there. And what it says is these procedures should be performed only by persons who hold a license, but who are under the supervision of a regulated or registered health care professional. Now, the big question is, what does supervision and oversight mean? We have to define that together. I'd like to come back to that a bit later on. It's not a slippery question. It's one that requires very careful consideration. So there are the ambers, and then the reds are those that are actually associated with high risk, not higher, high risk. And those I'm delighted to see there. These are the things that have caused us major concern, which are currently, again, freely available to offer on the high street. You'll be amazed when you read the list. Read it, own it, accept it, believe it. It's real. We're talking here about liposuction. We're talking here about breast and buttock augmentation. We're talking about hair restoration surgery, cogs, threads, and I could go on. But we are very clear, I can say we, because I feel very much part of this one, that the recommendation here is that those procedures should be regulated by the CQC in future, and that they should be restricted only to registered, regulated healthcare practitioners to perform. I mean, there's obviously detail in all of that, but that's what it is. And finally, there's an age restriction proposed that all of the procedures in the license should only be performed with persons over the age of 18 years, unless, of course, there's a very clear, explicitly defined medical reason or rationale.
Thank you, David. And I think just to translate some of that to very easy victories for a lot of the healthcare professionals in the room. So first of all, of course, minimum age restriction. I think that's an absolute essential move in the direction of safety. The idea of, so let's stay with the amber category, because we've got 100 people with us this evening, and I suspect all of them are particularly interested in injectables. In the amber category, there, one of the most contentious points will be, will non-medical injectors still be able to practice? And I think you've answered that with the idea that if they do, first of all, they would meet a certain standard of education and premises, but also secondly, they would be working under supervision. And so that definition of supervision, as you've said, is really important to define, but it's the closest we have gotten to having a more medicalized practice for injectables. So I think indeed we can see that as a definite step in the right direction. And then, of course, and you know, I like to be very open with these things. I've been very interested, of course, in the education side since the very beginning, and I'm very passionate about that. And I think the idea that a mandatory license for education standards is of course, an excellent step in the right direction. It is very important to make a very definitive statement here that we still don't know what that standard will be. And so I think a lot of people that want the question answered, will this particular course meet that standard, or will I need this certain qualification? The answer is we just don't know. But what I would really like you to do is give us your view on how this may unfold, and on what basis.
Sure. I just forgot one procedure, which I think I must remind you is important, which are weight loss injections. They're in the red. Very interesting. All kinds of evidence bases. But I want to get that in the picture because it starts to give you a feel of what's going to be out there. They're in the red. So, Tristan, you're absolutely right. So at the moment, there is no mandatory education and training standard. I've made that point very clear. I have made the point, however, that what is formally recognised but not mandated are the actual Health Education England standards, which of course the Department of Health owned at that time. But you will appreciate that when those standards were produced at that time, the number of procedures that were being performed were not all identified within that scope of that exercise. So the first thing I will say, there will be a need for new standards for some of the procedures for which standards do not currently actually exist. I'll come back to that as well. So here we go. We've got Health Education England standards. They are still proven to be fit for purpose, but they will need to be radically reviewed. Well, how can that happen? Well, it has to be a review of the JCCP and CPSA standards, which have absorbed the HE standards in 2018. So again, not a legally enforceable standard, Tristan, but one that I think one would not be sensible to throw the baby out with the bathwater, to coin a phrase. And I think that's a common feeling that it needs to start with what's there and then review. We don't know if that's what the government would wish to do, but pragmatically, there's got to be a starting point. And who would say that? Well, the professional regulators might say that. The professional associations, the medical professional associations, would say that. Because they were very much part through BCAM, for example, BCAM indeed, but particularly BACRAS, BARPS, and of course BAD, who were very much behind this. Association of Dermatologists. Our dentists are very interested too. So here we go. What I think will happen, I think there will be a further mapping of those standards against the scope of procedures that will be in the license. That has to happen. There needs to be a gap analysis on the current framework to see whether we would wish to enhance, strengthen the competencies as well. And that piece of work has yet to be defined, commissioned, and determined who will actually provide it. So the million-dollar question, what about organisations, providers such as Harley Academy, Cosmetic Courses, and others who are currently running JCCP of the Ofqual approved programs at level 7 for injectables? The answer is we can't give you a definite answer, but common sense says those current programs would need to be mapped against any new standard, and there should be an opportunity for those qualifications to be rolled forward, but potentially there may be some additional learning or a module or two to be added, Tristan. Again, I'm speaking very broadly because I don't know yet what the government's view would be, but I do want to make it clear to a point of assurance, we would not want to say goodbye to everything we have or the achievements your trainees and others who've worked to your standard of excellence have actually already mastered. It just would be ridiculous to do so.
And I think that makes sense to me, David. And I think when it comes to the practice of injectables, I think everyone here would agree that this is a field unto itself, and it warrants higher education, its own curriculum. And so then a lot of time we talk about how will this curriculum be delivered, and within the UK, we don't see that there will be a NHS specialty training program for aesthetic medicine, right? And so then, it's under under whose jurisdiction? Will that be under Ofqual? Will that be under another awarding authority? How do you see that being awarded?
So very, very good point indeed. And there are some questions there that we do not have answers to, Tristan. But remember this, all of you, please. Sorry, I think it's an important collective point that the scheme itself of licensing will be administered by local authority environmental health teams. That's the first thing. They do not set the standards, they ensure it's enforced. So therefore, they're going to need to be able to turn to an explicitly defined handbook of operational procedures to confirm which qualifications will meet the new standard. and what other alternatives are available or routes to demonstrate equivalence to that standard. I'm always careful about that word, Tristan. It's a very misused, abused word, equivalence. I've only today rewritten a whole paper for the JCCP on this very matter because it can be seen to be quite confusing. So the answer to your question is, if it's a qualification, I feel very sure it will have to be awarded either by a university or by an Ofqual regulated awarding body as a qualification. So that makes complete sense. I'm going to call this new standard an industry standard for a moment. It's a working definition that says if the Department of Health and Social Care mandate that new standard, then someone's got to oversee it. Then we get to the point of who will then quality assure the education providers who provide the actual Ofqual industry standard approved qualifications via the awarding bodies. I'm sorry, there's a lot of language in that. I'm sorry, but it's the right answer. So I would like to see, Tristan, a regulator of some description holding a register of all of those approved education and training providers, so that when you present your certificate or your evidence of completion of a program, it can be checked against a list of approved providers. And that's what the environmental health officers will probably need. Who will perform that function? I don't know. I've got ideas, but I think it's something we have to think about. But it's a real question that has to be solved.
Okay, a couple of quick fire questions now before we go to a more general Q&A. So the first one is, when do you think we will have more information?
Well, first of all, this consultation runs the 28th of October. So there won't be radio silence. We'll all be very busy, of course. And I urge you all to present your own responses collectively or individually, because it is important. The questions are very simple. Do you agree with the stratification? Do you agree that there should be oversight for the actual amber category? Have we collectively got the right procedures in the green, the amber and the red? I was talking to some colleagues today from the beauty industry. They want to move some from green to amber and one from amber to red. So let's be clear about this. People are interested in protecting the public. So that's the first thing. That consultation will have to be reviewed and the outcomes considered. Probably next January, we'll have a very clear view of the procedures. We'll then hear, sure, by February time, what the process will be for the standard setting for the education and training approach. So bearing in mind, all this has got to be in place for early 2026, I think. But believe me, I thought, how can it take so long? I think we're going to need that time to get it right.
Very good. Another question, and I think a lot of professionals on the webinar may be thinking, they are committed to doing things properly and medically and professionally, and that they have jumped through all the right hoops, in their mind, trained properly. And this license, unless it truly restricts practice within the medical field, could feel like a little bit of an additional burden, an additional unnecessary form of regulation on already highly regulated professionals. What could you say to those practitioners to explain the situation and potentially reassure them?
Well, first of all, I will tell you that the professional regulators are very supportive of the license. That's the first thing. And I can assure you,
say that. I think that's really important. Yeah,
it's a very obvious answer, but it's a very important answer. And I've had conversations with all of the regulators. They get that very clearly. In fact, it would be wrong for me to go beyond that. My memorandum of understanding with the regulators has brought us to a point of consensus on the need for this. Let me give you a quick example. Many of you on the call today will be doctors. I know not all of you, but many of you will be. If you were actually working, say, in actual cosmetic surgery, you may be aware, you're back to Keogh, as you quite rightly reminded us, where it all started, where the Wild West was discovered in 2013 by Bruce Keogh. By the way, Bruce was then the Chief Medical Officer at the Department of Health, so that was his role. Quickly move to the point then, but the issue would be very clearly that if you are actually working as a doctor in plastic surgery, you might very soon find that you will be subjected to a credentialing exercise against a national standard for plastic surgery. Now, that's something GMC are exploring. It's not agreed. The Royal College of Surgeons is very involved. I'm meeting them again next week, colleagues, to have conversations. What do I say? I see the new standard being equivalent to a credentialing standard that could well be linked to your medical appraisal in terms of the work you do every year to demonstrate your fitness to practice, your CPD update. So I'm trying to avoid duplication here of effort, but I do think it's critically important. You cannot have it both ways. If you qualified as a doctor, you've completed your FY years, and of course you're now moving into your specialist training, your ST training, then there is no destination for you yet in aesthetic practice itself. You'll be in general practice, etc. Very important part of our world, I can assure you. But my view is that this will demonstrate the postgraduate level of achievement and requirement that you need to demonstrate your specialism as aesthetic specialist doctors. And I think that's really important.
Thank you. So now we're going to start running through some questions from the audience this evening. So here's one from Kate. What do you think will happen for mobile practitioners, and with the premises license, that might be a problem?
Stop it. So there is no intention for that to be in the license. We think it's wrong. Of course, I can't say it's going to happen, but watch my eyes. I don't think that's going to be there. It's a no-no, red line. So I think a quick answer.
Okay. Would the JCCP be able to provide a list of accredited training providers?
So on the website, you can find it there. It's there on our website. If you go into the website, go into the education and training zone. It's on you can access it from the front page, and there is a tab, a list of accredited JCCP education and training providers.
Thank you, David. So a question from Mark, someone who's considering training in injectables, should they sign up for a level 7 until they make, or should they wait until they've made up their mind on what's needed? That's a difficult one for you.
It's a very difficult one for me, because obviously I'm very clear in my view. I get this question every day, Tristan, every day. My advice is always, until we know what the new standard is, I cannot give you a definitive outcome. What I can say to you, if you are starting your journey, and I think it's an important point where you're starting your journey at a postgraduate level from undergraduate practice, I would advise you to certainly consider seriously starting your journey with an approved accredited provider, because as I said already, that all of the standards that have been provided by those accredited or approved providers meet the HEE and JCCP standards. But I am not here on a marketing or commercial rate basis. That was the advice I would give anybody, Tristan.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to keep going through these. Peter, I can answer this one myself, relating to a premises license. It's not going to be the same as the CQC. It will be something different. The CQC does not have the ability to regulate so many professionals. Would you agree with that, David?
Watch this space. So what I will say is, Tristan's not wrong, but what I will say is, if you're working from CQC regulated or registered premises for your aesthetic practice, then I would certainly hope that you would not be subjected to a double scheme of premises inspection. In other words, I would like to see an alignment of the current scheme of inspection from CQC being enhanced to pick up any other requirements that the local authority require. So we're having those conversations, Tristan, to remove the chance of the challenge of double inspection. But you're so right, Tristan. We do not know at this stage what the actual CQC's oversight would be for non-healthcare practitioners. At the moment, they are out of scope. So the premises license would have to be administered by the local authority unequivocally for those. And you would also, as a CQC regulated business, have to meet the standards in the premises license set by the government, but hopefully they might be covered off by your CQC inspection as well.
Okay. I'm going to give you a tricky one now, David. So
thank you.
For there's definitely some concern that a beautician or a non-medical professional will find a pathway to be able to then carry out injectables. And the question is, how might that be possible when currently no high quality education institutions would train them?
Yeah, David agrees completely with that question. Thank you. Very sensible. It's the reality. I'm asked often, why can't I come onto a course? Why can't I? We don't have any courses because we have not yet had that opportunity. But there are other routes, Tristan. You must remember, we're in a world now where apprenticeships are now available. So once the new standard is set by the government, there is no reason why apprenticeship standards can't be developed up to level 7, because that's true of any profession. I'm not talking about aesthetics, I'm talking about any profession. So it's a future model, Tristan, to be frank. At the moment, we will never accept anybody onto one of our approved programs for level 7 injectables because we do not have the evidence of those providers being in place. We've never, ever awarded or approved a program at this level, but there will have to be a whole resurgence of new providers coming on board who will have to meet the standard. It's going to be a challenge, but please don't rule it out. I'll give you a quick example. Birmingham City University College provide a level 6 degree in aesthetics. It doesn't meet our standards, but it would be difficult for that program to integrate standards. For example, it's just an example. There are others too. That's a university approved provider. So I think we're not there by any means, but there's a big job of work to do because we've got to level this. Government will say, you've got to have opportunity for progression if we're going to introduce this license. It can't just be blocked. We can't do it yet. It's an important challenge.
Thank you very much, David. I'm going to give you 2 or 3 more questions before we wrap up, okay? So question about the JCCP register. So what are the prerequisites to be able to join the JCCP register?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll be very quick on that. They again are on the website, but thank you for raising the question. This is not a marketing ploy either for the JCCP. Number one, we do not charge any registration fee or membership fee. We're a charity, so there's not a cost involved. That's interesting. So at the moment, we're saying until the license is in place, not a charge or cost to join. You must be a regulated healthcare practitioner. You must have up-to-date PIN, etc., that can be checked against your actual GMC, GDC, NMC record register. And you must also be a good character by self-declaration. And you must have a minimum of 2 years experience to be on our full register. If you do not meet the training standard at the moment, you can join the register on what we call category 2, which means you are designated as meeting the standards, but not being able to be fully registered on category 1, because that's where a member of the public needs to know that you do not possess the full academic or educational standard. So differentiated category 2, join, absolutely positive, public that you're out there, you're full members, but you still have conditions until you get the qualification. At the moment, that is open-ended, Tristan, until we know the new standard and the routes to it.
Thank you. Okay, here's another one, David. Say someone, a nurse or a doctor, joins one of your, does a level 7 from a JCCP approved training provider. How, and they get their qualification. Given that we've established that we don't know what this future standard will be, what does the process look like in your mind for making sure in the future that they might?
Oh, no, I get it completely. So the first thing we've got to do, all of us, I'm with you on this one, we will have to map the JCCP standards that you already possess in terms of the proficiency outcomes with your provider against the new standard. I hope we're going to be very involved in helping to set that new standard, along with many other colleagues as well. So we're not going to be in any way diluting the new standard to make it fit our current. So let's be clear about that. But what I would be doing with colleagues will be to actually identify the gap between the current and the new. And if it is required, then we would identify some simple module, not simple, that's the wrong word, but collective modules of learning that will be required for top-ups. In other words, I can also tell you good point this, but I believe, don't hold me to this, that when the license comes in 2026, you might be given up to 2 years to demonstrate your full compliance with the new standard, which means top up part of a CPD journey, bolt that on through an assessed outcome to your initial current qualification. Then I think you will be fit for purpose for the license. I can't believe it could go any other way, to be quite frank.
So I'm with you, David. So the idea is that this standard will exist at a higher postgraduate level, we believe, and with a defined curriculum that we have already seen the first versions of from Health Education England, we believe. And then that if individuals decide to get a qualification now, then there will be a potential gap. And that gap will be, we believe, a relatively small gap that then will be eligible for the license. And that is the expected pathway in your mind.
It is. I see a number of messages coming in. Quick one here. Have a look at the JCCP website. On the news feed on the front page, we have a press release on last Saturday, which relates to the new license. The consultation paper. Within it, embedded in that press release, are 2 links. An FAQ paper will pop up. I think you'll find that really useful to many of the questions here, and also a guide to what the license is, the consultation is saying. So those 2 documents are freely available from our website, Tristan. Access them from the feed on the front page of press releases, and you can click on those 2 links. I'm just throwing that in, not for my sake, so I think it might help folks to get more information. And tomorrow, I hope to release a 20-minute animated video recording, not of me, you'll be pleased to hear, of this whole process, which again will be on our website.
Thank you so much, David. I'm going to just, I suppose, hand over to you for a closing statement, because I think we've reached our 45 minutes. There's lots and lots of questions. I'm sorry we can't answer them all. I've tried to be as the best journalist I can today and be as independent as possible. I hope that's come across well. So over to you, David, for your question.
And bless you for your questions. I mean, these are important questions. Every question that you've raised needs either to be answered to your satisfaction, or if you believe, as I know, there will be unknown answers at the moment, we need to feed them into our responses to consultation. The example is, so many of you have asked the question about supervision. Is it going to be remote? Is it going to be face-to-face? The answer is, I don't know that yet. I know what I believe. I know what you believe. Well, do I? I guess I do. Please, please, please make sure you put that into the consultation paper. So important. But I will tell you, there will be working groups to start asking the question on supervision, Tristan, against each of the procedures are definitively included in the amber category. So we'll come back to that. We couldn't answer it now. We can have a great conversation, but we don't. So what I'm going to ask you is, be resilient in your thinking, be confident in your futures, be absolutely determined to respond to the consultation, either individually, organisationally, through your social media groups, because it is critically important that we have consensus on the issues that you believe are of concern to yourself. At the end of the day, this is all about public protection, patient safety, but I don't underestimate the significance of commercial importance. As I said at the beginning, if we've got the standards right, you can celebrate those publicly with your license, and then you will be able to ensure enhanced business. Set the standards at the right level, at the highest level that we need to ensure quality, then you start to filter the practitioner feed into the actual procedures themselves and start to answer some of your questions.
Fantastic. Well, David, I just want to finish by saying thank you to you, and to also acknowledge the fact that you've been really putting in all this work for the last number of years without any commercial incentive for yourself. I think you've done a very selfless job, and what's needed to bring us together in quite a political and commercial sector, it required this kind of energy to come in. So I want to acknowledge that, and thank you for your time this evening, David.
An absolute pleasure. The journey is just starting, folks. I know that. But thank God, it's a journey I wish I was joining now, not back in 2014. But no, they are exciting times, but we've got a lot of work to do, but collectively we'll get there. It's been a pleasure being with you all. Bless you and thank you. Thank you, Tristan, for the invitation. Been really great to be with you. Have a great evening. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.